As if that wasn't enough custom tools for one video, got another custom tool I need to rebuild because this one's seen better days. Been using this to get my synchronizer to work on these carburetors, and well, you know, over time, kind of. So, got a couple of fresh, unmolested, other than the cuts I just put into them, toilet paper rolls. We're gonna make another one of these guys because, I mean, you've got to, you know, you just got to. Oh, it's gonna be so good. So if you're not really familiar, you know, these synchronizer tools, this little float kind of tells you how much your carburetor is sucking, and it sort of requires a nice flat surface for this to seal against. And these carburetors do not have that until you make one of these sweet items right here. And you just, right there. Pretty sure you can buy something too, but you know, I'm cheap. Why would I do that? All right, here we are with really a work of art is what we're talking about here. It's not just a bush tool, it's definitely a work of art. And you know, more seriously though, it's totally sufficient for what I need it to do. And as you're about to find out, it's going to work just fine. Here's something I haven't yet seen in anybody's videos when they rebuild these carburetors. Guide I'm using shows to use, I think it's 0.024 inches or 0.6 millimeter or something. And you know, use a wire gauge, make sure that your throttle plate has that much when it's fully closed, basically, right? And that's determined by this linkage arm here up to your fast idle choke scenario. And so I don't have those wire gauges, and my MIG wire is something like 30 thou, something like that, so it's a little bit too much. But as it turns out, a razor blade is exactly right, so I just broke this edge off of this razor blade, and that's what we're going to use. So as you can imagine, put my feeler gauge in there, come up to this guy, loosen this top nut about as far out as I can go, bring this top nut up until there's no more slack in this bar here, and went ahead and tightened my top nut back up. And the test is basically this. You know, as soon as I start to push down on this, oh, there falls my feeler gauge. And now that it's only being held open by as much as this rod can provide, I can check it again by just shoving that feeler gauge back into there, and it goes. So I think that's about as close as I imagine I need to get it. We'll find out. Some of you might say this is overkill, and there might even be a valid point to be made there. But the goal here is to know exactly when the idle screw begins to actually push on this lever, and start from there and go a half a turn in. And I've got this available. It took about 45 seconds to set it up. I'm going to know exactly when this thing begins to push, and I'll be able to set it very accurately. This is just something that my eyeballs are not going to be able to see. But this gauge can sure help me to see it. And there it is. Now I know exactly where it begins to affect the lever. Third verse, same as the first. Starting back over here, and I've got my idle speed screws turned exactly 1/2 of a turn in from the point where they begin to make contact and affect the throttle plate on both sides. And I've got my idle mixture screws turned in all the way gently and back out 1.5 turns each. And that is where we will begin to set these carbs. So now the move is to equally turn the throttle plate idle speed adjustment screws until we get the RPMs that we're looking for. And I'm having to dial them out because our RPMs are too high. But my goodness, let me just show you how wonderful this is. Look, I can get my arm in there. I'm not burning myself. There's plenty of room. This is a delight. Not that delight. Adjust our little dial in here until this guy is somewhere in the middle. Let it settle. Compare it to the other side. The other side's a little high, and I don't mind lowering my RPMs a little bit. So I'll turn this screw out a little bit more and slow it down just a touch. Get that guy where I want it to be. I went just a little bit too low for a moment and could hear an obvious miss. Not really miss, but it just sounded off. Dialed it back in a little bit. Sounds better, and that thing's right where I want it to be. So I'm happy with the idle speed screws. We'll move on to the mixture screws. Turned in both adjustment screws at the exact same time, at the exact same amount, until I started hearing the engine struggle, and then brought each one of them out 1/4 of a turn. Sounding a lot better. Test drive was beautiful, and I'm very, very happy, but as I check my pole here, I can tell that I definitely am opening this side just a little bit more quickly than this side, which means this rod is too short and therefore needs to come out a bit. And for that, I'm going to use my 1/4 inch and 7mm wrenches. Naturally, the 1/4 inch goes here and the 7mm goes on here. Now on the surface, when adjusting these, it kind of seems like, you know, you really only can do like a full turn to either tighten or loosen it. And to a certain degree that's true, except that you do have some ability to rotate this shaft here a little bit. You know, you've got whatever it is, you know, maybe 12 degrees or something on each ball joint. And so when I had set this up last time, I had this joint twisted all the way in one direction, and then, you know, just as tight as it could be the other direction on this side, and it needed to be just a little bit looser. So I was able to go the exact opposite direction on this side and then go ahead and spin this thing almost, you know, 360 degrees, but then again get it as tight as it can, so I don't have a lot of play in here. Like this one, you can see I can really move it like, you know, that, because I've still got all that play available. But we don't need to adjust this side. We need to adjust this side. And so that's why you can see, like, if I try to spin this, I really can't, because I've just got it as tight as it can be both directions here on this. And so that's where it needs to be. I've got it where they're opening just right. So I've come to learn why Volkswagen decided to move the coil to here when they got, this air cleaner design. It's a little bit tight. I've already got this maxed out as far left as it can go and twisted up as much as it can go. I'm getting ready to take it off. It's not going to be absolutely vital to do it, but I just want a little bit more clearance. I'm going to go ahead and take this guy off and just shave the littlest bit here so that I can get a little more rotation and get it up a little bit further away from that connection there, because that's pretty tight. You can kind of see we've just got, straight edge here on this side. Of made us a bit of a curve. See if it can gain us just a little bit more. So here we are. Yeah, this is awful. It's going to get replaced very soon. I got most of the stuff I need today to rectify that issue, but we've got the coil in position. This hose just barely touches the side of the coil when it's on. It's not difficult to get on at all. And it looks like everything's going to work out. Even this wire here that doesn't have an extra millimeter of length on it is able to reach. And my other condenser had the same exact length wire that is just like too short to do anything with for the most part. So I'm happy with where this is. Gonna get out and drive it. I've got this car running from a carburetor perspective better than any Volkswagen I've driven before. You hear that? Just barely, right? Me too. It's amazing. It's idling so beautifully, I can barely get over it. When rebuilding the carburetors, there's the normal stuff that everyone talks about, and it's very important, right? Make sure all of your jets are really clean and all the passageways are really clean. Make sure your mixture screws come to a nice fine point, there's no steps and it's not deformed. All of these things that you always hear about. But there are some things that I don't really ever hear anybody talking about, like making certain that your throttle plates are, if not set to the exact number, which I believe is 0.024, that they are the exact same as one another. And the process for how to do that is important. And then of course, making sure that your carburetors are opening at exactly the same moment. And I think most people that talk about synchronizing carburetors do go into that.
But hang on for one more thing. I feel like this has the potential to be the most important overlooked item. The book I'm referencing for this rebuild goes into the placement of the discharge tubes, both of them. We're interested in both the placement on the X and Y axis, and with very good reason. Now, there's a wealth of information out there on atomization, and people have thoroughly researched every aspect of it, including the application to an internal combustion engine. Suffice it to say, it is important to have good atomization of your fuel, and things like travel distance affect the quality of atomization. Referring to the book, the accelerator pump tube should be 9 millimeters, while the power fuel tube should be 15 millimeters below the top of the carburetor. The angle of the camera here may not be the best, but even worse, the surfaces are awful. When taking this measurement, you're supposed to be measuring from the top of the carb, not the bottom of the cover. So you'll want to lay your gasket down or visually account for it. The X-axis position of the accelerator pump tube should inject fuel when the throttle valve is partially opened, and the power fuel tube should be midway between the side of the venturi wall and the central discharge arm. Back to the idea of atomization. If this tube were bent in such a way that its fuel simply hit the throttle plate, the fuel would accumulate on the plate and dribble down the throat of the carb. Obviously not ideal.
But it all just kind of comes together, and when you get it just right, it feels like nothing I've ever felt before. Thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it, maybe even learned something. If you were paying close attention, you might have realized that there's a whole bunch of changes I made that I did not go into detail in this video at all. I'll have some more videos coming out soon, show some of the other cool things I did along the way getting to this point. As always, like, subscribe, comment. Please comment. I want to hear from you guys. I'm interested to know what you guys are working on, what you think of what I'm doing, what you think of my car, whatever.